Chapter 9. Don't worry, be happy. Don't all men desire happiness? And yet perhaps this is one of those ridiculous questions which I am afraid to ask, and which ought not to be asked by a sensible man. For what human being is there who does not desire happiness? There is no one, said Clinias, who does not. Well then, I said, since we all of us desire happiness, how can we be happy? That is the next question. Socrates from Euphidenus by Plato. Near the beginning of this book, I quoted Seneca. There is not anything in this world, perhaps, that is more talked of and less understood than the business of a happy life. It is every man's wish and design, and yet not one of 1,000 that knows wherein that happiness consists. And I quoted Kant. But it is a misfortune that the concept of happiness is such an indeterminate concept, that although every human being wishes to attain this, he can still never say determinately and consistently with himself what he really wishes and wills. I hope that now, as we near the end of this book, we have some answers to Seneca's, and while there is not one foolproof way to live the good life, I hope to have offered a pathway, illuminated by the light of social science, to being happy. Happiness is not captured in a willful pursuit. Rather, it is a destination one reaches by making optimal decisions, which in turn are the product of specific winning mindsets. In December 2021, on my first trip since the COVID pandemic, I traveled to San Antonio, Texas to deliver a lecture on the parasitic mind. An investment banking firm had chosen my book as its book of the year, and had invited me to address an audience of esteemed guests and clients, many from the banking and finance industries. At the end of the event, I stuck around to mingle with the guests and sign copies of my book. The young man came up to me and asked me 2 questions of particular relevance to this book's contents. He asked first how he could, as a college student, stay true to his beliefs, given that his grades might depend on the goodwill of ideologically bigoted progressive professors. Unlike me, he said, he was not a tenured professor who could easily withstand the negative consequences of speaking his mind. He also asked me how he should go about becoming a public intellectual. He wanted to be like me. In responding to his first question, I reminded him that tenure does not protect me from the innumerable death threats that I have received. It does not protect me from the consequential costs that I have had to bear professionally, such as losing out on lucrative professorships, grants, and other rewards. Regardless of all this, one must be true to what one believes. One must be authentic. In answering his second question, I told him that there is no 1-2-3 recipe to become a public intellectual. It is not a position you seek, it is something that happens to you if you have valuable and interesting things to say. The psychiatrist and neurologist Viktor E. Frankl made a similar point regarding the pursuit of success and happiness. Don't aim at success. The more you aim at it and make it a target, the more you are going to miss it. For success, like happiness, cannot be pursued. It must ensue, and it only does so as the unintended side effect of one's dedication to a cause greater than oneself, or as the byproduct of one's surrender to a person other than oneself. Happiness must happen, and the same holds for success. You have to let it happen by not caring about it. I want you to listen to what your conscience commands you to do, and go on to carry it out to the best of your knowledge. Then you will live to see that in the long run, I say, success will follow you, precisely because you had forgotten to think about it. Notwithstanding Frankl's admonition against the willful pursuit of happiness, and the empirical evidence highlighting that its dogged pursuit can yield deleterious effects, there appears to be empirical evidence in support of the efficacy of happiness training programs that encourage cognitive reframing, mindfulness, and expressions of gratitude. In a research synthesis of 179 findings of the effects of happiness training programs, 96% yielded an increase in happiness, notwithstanding the fact that the positive effects were modest. This is a hopeful message in that it reaffirms the fact that our happiness is in part shaped by the actions we take, the decisions that we make, and the mindsets that we adopt, and that we can learn ways to find the right path to happiness, a path that is lined with such old-fashioned virtues as temperance, gratitude, and hope. Let happiness be the destination, the outcome, and not the primary pursuit. I next present 2 brief stories of men who had every reason to be unhappy and miserable, and yet, via their winning mindsets, have found existential contentment. They clearly did not willfully pursue happiness, but rather conquered their tragic lot in life through positive thinking. The existential gratitude of a wrongly imprisoned man. We all experience stressful periods in our lives. It sometimes seems that the cosmos is conspiring against us, but whenever I find myself wallowing about my lot, I contextualize things. I put my current sources of anger, frustration, and stress within some broader framework. Take the COVID pandemic. It has taken a toll on everyone. The attacks on our personal freedoms have been difficult to endure, and yet I remembered, I am not doing so badly. I hold a job with a guaranteed income. My experiences have been infinitely less difficult than those of small business owners, who have had to make countless sacrifices and be endlessly inventive just to survive. There is an old saying that someone is always worse off than you are. Whether you are a business professor, or a small business owner, or a day laborer, putting your own situation in a broader context can make you count your advantages in any circumstance. Of all the wonderful guests I have hosted on my show, few have been as memorable as David McCallum. David is not a famous man, but he teaches an important lesson about life. David was exonerated from a murder charge. After spending 29 years in prison, I had first heard David's story while watching David and Me, a 2014 documentary about his case. I was so moved by his unimaginable grace and sense of forgiveness that I felt compelled to reach out to him. During our conversation, I confessed to David that he was a better man than I am because I would have been full of anger and venom and a poisonous desire for revenge had I experienced his reality. David, however, appeared well-adjusted, enlightened, wise, and forgiving. I asked him how he managed that, and he offered two poignant responses. First, he told me, after he was arrested, his mother asked him if he was guilty. He said no, and she never asked again. He felt at peace knowing that his mom believed him. Then he told me that one of his sisters suffered from cerebral palsy. She had been bedridden her entire life. Her example inspired him. She persevered through her own tragic reality, and what he faced was nothing in comparison. I was awestruck by David's purity of spirit, his ineradicable optimism, and his abiding sense of gratitude. I suspect his sense of gratitude for his life and its own positive aspects saved his soul from being destroyed by his circumstances. Gratitude offers a partial inoculation against the vagaries of life and is, generally speaking, positively correlated with happiness. To be grateful while unjustly imprisoned is a true accomplishment of character. The Happy Homeless Scholar. During the COVID pandemic, my wife and I seldom enjoyed the opportunity of going to our favorite restaurants. This had the silver lining, as I mentioned, of helping me lose a sizable amount of weight. We did, however, continue to frequent a Peruvian rotisserie chicken dive. On one such outing, we came across a disheveled and perhaps homeless man sitting on the steps of the establishment. As we waited to be served in the outside queue, I struck up a conversation with him. He asked me what I did for a living. After I told him, he said, "This seems like serious work, but you seem strong to be able to handle it." I was flattered by his response, and it was a highlight of my day. Most people might have ignored this elderly man, but my wife and I chose to engage him. Engaging him brought me the pleasure of his compliment. But that aside, my wife and I believe that all people deserve to be treated with respect and dignity, even when their exteriors might look weathered and destitute. Sometimes we are rewarded with a nice little conversation. Talking with this man reminded me of another extraordinary story involving homelessness. The beginning of that story happened to me nearly 20 years ago, when I lived in Southern California. I was seated at a cafe working on a project, and I had several books sprawled on the table. An elegant gentleman, speaking with a slight British accent, approached me to comment about some of the books on the table. His name was Bijan Jalani, and he explained to me that he was pursuing a PhD at UC Irvine and was writing a dissertation on the issue of homelessness. As part of his fieldwork, he had integrated himself within the homeless community. We communicated briefly via email after I moved back to Montreal, but I otherwise lost track of him, only to discover later that incredibly Jalani, a once reasonably wealthy man, had eventually become homeless himself. I came across a 2011 article in the OC Weekly that described his extraordinary life trajectory. In reading the article, I was struck by his admirable lack of self-pity. He told the reporter, "I realize people have it a lot worse." Like David McCallum, Jalani never lost sight of the fact that however desperate our plight, it is, within a bigger context, not that bad, and that realization affords us an instantaneous jolt of gratitude and psychological well-being. This attitude is not one of schadenfreude, reveling in another's misfortune, but rather of the optimism we should all feel because we are alive. In the article, Bijan continues, "Every morning I remind myself who I am." And then he adds, "I can write, I can think, I'm educated, I'm a moral person, I like being around people, I'm adaptable, humble, and I love to laugh." To exhibit this level of optimism when so downtrodden is a testament to his positive spirit and mindset. Bijan said that besides owning his SUV, which serves as his home, and a no-frill cell phone, he rejoices at having a gym membership and a card to the Newport Beach Public Library. In other words, in a truly stoic and ascetic manner, He reaffirms the importance of a healthy body and an inquisitive mind as central features in supporting a life of happiness. I am convinced that his life story would constitute a wonderful film, for it would serve as a powerful reminder of the truly important things in life.